with men. He shall dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and Almighty God will be with them.
He shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. There shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, no more pain. The former things are all passed away.
He that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. He said unto me, Write these words, for they are faithful and true. And it is done. It is done. It is done. It is done. He is the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. The Son of God, King of kings, Lord of lords, He's everything. Messiah, Jehovah, Prince of Peace is He. The Son of Man, seed of Abraham, second person of the Trinity. He is the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. The Son of God, King of kings, Lord of lords, He's everything. Messiah, Jehovah, Prince of Peace is He. The Son of Man, seed of Abraham, second person in the Trinity. He is the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. The Son of God, King of kings, Lord of lords, He's everything. Messiah, Jehovah, Prince of Peace is He. The Son of Man, seed of Abraham, second person in the Trinity. He is the Alpha and Omega, the Son of God, the King of kings, Messiah, Jehovah, the great I am, seed of Abraham. He's the Alpha and Omega, the Lord of everything. He is God.
Hear now the word of the Lord. Now about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, and went up to the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking about his exodus, which he was about to fulfill in Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep. But as they awoke, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us set up 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, not realizing what he was saying. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. And then from the cloud came a voice that said, This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him. When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So you left your family, you gave up your livelihood, You put yourself at personal risk to follow someone you believe to be the hope and promise of your people, the hope and promise of liberation from those who held you captive. You know, when Jesus called Peter, James, and John, they were already tired. Fishing in the Sea of Galilee was hard, back-breaking work. Many nights were spent on a volatile lake. The work of a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee was heavy manual labor. And of course, they were dependent, as all fishermen are, on a good catch, not something they could depend on in that sea. To make matters worse, they had quotas and they had taxes. Their so-called Jewish leader, Herod Antipas, exacted tolls on these fishermen. There was a high demand in that society for fish and fish products, so Herod made sure that the demands on fishermen were so heavy that they had to work and work and work in order to pay their tolls and eke out enough to feed their family. They had to work more than they usually would just to feed their families. So these fishermen, Peter, James, and John, they were exhausted, physically, mentally, spiritually exhausted. Hope was in short supply. And along comes Jesus offering hope. So they dropped everything. They dropped everything to follow that hope. And then Jesus drops the bomb on them. I'm going to die. I'm going to be given up to the Romans by our own people. And I will be put to death. You know, Jesus knew how hard this must have been for these three men to hear, especially for all the disciples, but especially Peter, James, and John, because they were the three leaders. Jesus had a lot of confidence in Peter, James, and John. He knew that he needed to inspire his three leaders after hearing such bad news. So he took them up to a mountain for a little retreat. A little retreat. Jesus and his three leaders. A leadership retreat. You know, most leadership retreats that I've been to are not very inspiring. They're not. But this leadership retreat was different. But man, these guys were exhausted. They were probably in no mood to climb up a mountain and have a leadership retreat. The text says, if you notice, it says they were weighed down with sleep. Don't we all know what that feels like? To be weighed down with sleep. In biblical times, you went to the mountain. You climbed up on top of a mountain to be close to God. That's why Moses' face was shining in our first reading, because he got close to God. He saw God up on that mountain. And maybe that's why most leadership retreats aren't very inspiring. Maybe that's why they're very underwhelming to me anyway. In most leadership retreats, you go to a room, maybe it's the church fellowship hall or a conference center. There's awful white lighting, terrible white lighting. The chairs are hard. The tables are hard. And you spend all day in that room planning, and you mix in a little prayer while you're at it. If I'm honest, I don't think I've ever left a leadership retreat feeling inspired or spiritually renewed or closer to God. Maybe all leadership retreats should be held on top of a mountain. Wouldn't that be great? Because if you've ever been to the top of a mountain, you cannot help but feel closer to God. The glory from the top of the mountain is stunning. I remember one time back in the early 90s when Julie and I are not mountain climbers. We'd never climbed a mountain before, but there was a mountain just outside of Anchorage called Flat Top. And everybody told us, because we were relatively new in Alaska at that time, and everybody told us it's an easy little hike. Even children do it. Anybody can do it. So you go and do Flat Top, and you say you've done it. It's about 4,000 feet high. So in the summer, the sun doesn't set till midnight. And it doesn't get very far below the horizon, so it's never fully dark in the deepness of the summer. So we thought it would be cool. If Flat Top's such an easy little hike, we thought it'd be cool to go to Flat Top and watch the sunset at midnight over the skyline of Anchorage. Sounds great. Experience we'll never forget. So we start hiking, everything's going on well until we apparently took the wrong trail up, that easy little part. And eventually we found ourselves on a steep vertical incline. Not kidding, like this, looking up. Julie was ahead of me. And when I looked up, and we were both afraid, all I could see was her behind. And she and I were hanging on to rocks for our life. One slip up, we'd be rolling down that mountain. Easy hike, anyone can do it. And Julie, rather than keep going like she should have kept going, she stopped, frozen in fear, just stopped. She starts crying. Her tears were dripping on me. That's how big those tears were. This was a heaving cry. And I was frightened too, but I knew we had to keep moving. We couldn't stop. We had to keep moving because we were going to lose our strength and fall. So in my best football coach voice, I start yelling at Julie to man up and move on, or we're both going to lose our traction and slip. Now, since we're approaching Lent, I probably should confess that I may have used other more colorful words to get her to move on. There are children present. And after what seemed like a very lengthy struggle, we finally got to the top of that mountain. We were exhausted, weighed down with exhaustion. Julie was still crying. It took us a while to settle down, regain some energy. We just wanted to go to sleep. And every muscle in our body was screaming at us. We didn't expect this. And the thought of making our way back down that mountain was even more terrifying to us, because the hardest part of climbing a mountain isn't going up. It's going down. And what if we took the wrong trail down? Because we weren't sure where we were. If we could have built a tent up there, we would have, just to sleep it off. But the thing that made it all better, the thing that made it all worth it, the thing that brought our energy back, the thing we still talk about today, was the magnificent view of the sun setting over the skyline of Anchorage from 4,000 feet high. Spectacular, inspiring, glorious. We didn't want to leave. We wanted to stay, but we knew we had to get down from that mountain before it got a little too dark. And thankfully, we found the correct trail going down, so it wasn't so bad. But in those moments on top of that mountain, we felt close to God. We saw the glory of God on top of that mountain. And then when we got down, we got in the car and we drove to a local 24-hour donut shop. Donuts never tasted so good. The glory of God in donuts, does it get any better than that? I hope that between now and Wednesday, you will get your fill of donuts. I might even make a trip to Duck Donuts on Fat Tuesday. But Jesus didn't have any donuts for Peter, James, and John, but what he gave them was much better than a donut and a far better picture of glory than the view from the top of a mountain. He showed them the glory of God in his resurrected body, the glory of God in his resurrected body, standing there with Moses and Elijah standing next to him in their resurrected bodies. I can't imagine how stunning that view was for Peter, James, and John. Their heroes, the ones they'd heard about all their lives, were standing there next to Jesus, seeing them in person. Wow. Now this was the ultimate leadership retreat. This is not the leadership retreat that I've wanted to end as soon as they began. This is one that no one in their right mind would want to end. So what did Peter want to do? He wanted to do what we'd all want to do. Stay there. Don't leave. Keep all that glory to himself. Let's just put up 3 tents, Lord, and stay here. Then we won't have to go back down and face the darkness you said that was coming. Let's just stay here. Now, I don't blame Peter, not one bit. We are all Peter here. Especially after the news he heard just before then about the looming cross. But ultimately, hoarding the glory of God for ourselves is no good for us, and it's no good for those who need to hear about that glory. And Peter, James, and John wanted to run and tell the other disciples. They did, but Jesus told them not to. But I can guarantee you they didn't have to tell them because it changed them. It had to change them. I think the difference it made in them was enough said. They had seen glory, they witnessed transfiguration, and even though word of Jesus' death was not a welcome intrusion into their hope, they came down from that mountain and they kept on being disciples. They didn't despair, they just kept following, they kept listening. And that is witness enough. That is witness enough just to keep on going when you know things may not end well. And when God the Father spoke to Peter, James, and John, he said, "This is my son, my chosen, listen to him." Did you know that the word obey literally means to listen? We think of obey as just doing something somebody tells you to do. But the root of that word means to listen. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche said, "The essential thing in heaven and earth is that there should be a long obedience in the same direction." And the great writer Eugene Peterson picked up on that, and he said that's what discipleship is. It's a long obedience in the same direction. To keep on listening to God and seeking his glory even when darkness looms. Faith isn't about spiritual highs, because those are fleeting moments that wear off quickly. You can't stay up on that mountain forever. You must come down from that mountain, have a donut, and move on with life in all its difficulties. But even though you can't stay in the glory, you can witness to it. You can witness the glory that you see and the glory that you've seen. And the meaning of the Transfiguration of Christ, the meaning of this day that we celebrate, is that Christ's glory cast out the darkness. That's why I preached last week that we should stop giving voice to darkness. We should stop giving voice to darkness and negativity and instead give voice to God's glory. Because in giving voice to God's glory, we cast out the darkness and our faces will shine like Moses for all the world to see. Every single time we name God's glory in this world, we cast out a little more darkness. So my challenge for all of us this Lenten season is to give up giving voice to darkness and negativity and look for the glory. This Lent, look for the glory in the long, everyday obedience of discipleship. Maybe it's a baby cooing or a toddler showing her belly in church. A beautiful sunset, the kindness of people, a happy dog, whatever brings a smile to your face. Whatever brings a smile to your face and gives you hope, seek out that glory and give voice to it. Share it with others. End your day reflecting on all the glory you've seen every day. Give voice to the glory, not the devil in his darkness. Let's not give Satan any due this Lent. Let's take a moment of silence.